Hello everyone and welcome to episode 4 of Getting Good at Yomi, where we are going to cover how to study a matchup. Everything we're going to discuss today builds on the foundation we covered in episode 3, so if you haven't watched it, please go check it out, click on the link, watch that episode first, and then come back here and you'll have a better understanding of what's going on. Episode 3 is all about how to learn about a character. And those same principles and skills and approaches are going to come into play here when we're learning how to beat a character. So because we talked a little bit about Grave last episode, I'm going to keep using him as an example. He's also one of the characters that is on the simpler end of the complexity scale. And I've picked as his opponent DeGray, the Ghostly Diplomat, who's also on the simpler end of the scale. Very good characters for beginners. One of the first things you want to have a look at is the difference in life totals between the two characters. In this case, it's 0, so they're on even footing in terms of their health. That's not to say that one of them might not have an advantage in terms of the amount of damage that they can do. If, for example, Grave dealt an average combo damage of 30 damage a pop and DeGray did 20, then we would say, based purely on hit points, Grave has the advantage in the matchup because he only has to win combat 3 times versus DeGray's 5 in order to end the match. Another thing to look at is how many throws and dodges that these characters have. So we talked about having throws being a way to punish defensive play. So the more throws you have, the more potential you have to threaten a defensive turtling character. You can see that both of these characters have 4 ranks of throws, so they have throws on 4 of the cards, 4 of the types of cards in their deck. I've put in brackets a 2 in Grave's throws, however. Grave has abilities on his 7th throw and his 10th throw, so he's less likely to be wanting to play those cards as combat options, as throws, rather than use them for their ability. The way you value whether you want to throw or use an ability card for its ability or for its combat option is to have a look. It only makes sense to look at it in terms of a matchup. So we'll talk a little bit about what abilities Grave is likely to use in this matchup and whether that means anything in terms of the amounts of throws that he has available. Talked about dodges as being a late game option that lets you move around superior speed attacks from your opponent. So the amount of dodges as well as your maximum damage off of dodges will give you a gauge of how threatening you are in the late game in particular. So we can see that Grave has 3 ranks of dodges and DeGray has 4+. So why 4+? Well, DeGray's ace has an ability on it which allows him to recur it. So when he plays his ace as a dodge, so long as he is not thrown, he will return that dodge to his hand. So it would be inaccurate to say that he only has 4 ranks of dodges. He actually has quite a few more. So based on this information alone, we would say that DeGray probably has a strong late game. Next, we've looked at how many even and odd blocks these characters have. This is important when a character is knocked down. If you attack somebody who's knocked down, their even blocks will only block even attacks, and their odd blocks will only block odd attacks. So you have the ability to cross up your opponent when they're knocked down. If we look at Grave, we can see that he has an even distribution of even and odd blocks. And again, so he has 3 even blocks, 2 if you remove the blocks that have abilities on them, and the same thing for his odd blocks. He has 3 or 2 if you consider if you remove those with abilities on them. DeGray, on the other hand, has 4 even blocks and 2 odd blocks, or 4 even blocks and 3 if you discount the one that has an ability on it. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when DeGray has knocked Grave down, it's a 50-50 shot. There's no reason to prefer an even or an odd attack, except in terms of its speed. On the other hand, when Grave knocks Degree down, he should be thinking about what odd attacks he can muster and whether it's a good idea to do so, because the odds of Degree having a odd block to deal with that is less than the even blocks he has at his disposal, especially since you can look at your opponent's discard pile to count how many odd blocks have been used. You may be in a situation where your odd attack there's no odd blocks in the opponent's deck, and therefore they can't possibly block it. They would have to respond with a reversal of some kind, or a move that's faster than whatever attack you're going to be attacking with. So already we have a little bit of differentiation we can see between these characters. Let's move on to their innate abilities. Grave has an ability called Knowing the Opponent, so when he blocks an attack, he can reveal a card from his hand. If he combat reveals that card and wins with it, he gets a queen. He can search from his deck or his discard. Or if he loses with it, he draws a card. Degree, his ability is called Moral High Ground. If Degree's opponent has more cards in hand than him, his special attacks and super attacks deal extra damage equal to the difference. So right away we can see some interaction between those two abilities. Grave's ability is keyed off of blocks, so he wants to block a little bit more than usual, and blocking is a good way of building hand, as we discussed. He also, whether he wins or not with his ability reveal, will draw a card from it. So again, his ability allows him to keep his hand higher than other characters would be capable of. Ordinarily, that's just a straight, great ability to have. It's always better to have more cards in hand than fewer cards in hand. Against Degree, however, that ability comes with a bit of a downside. Degree literally kills you faster the more cards you have in your hand than him. So Grave has to consider how valuable it is to have an overwhelming amount of cards in hand versus a mid or low card Degree, because that could be quite scary for him and Degree might be able to deal a considerable amount of damage if Grave is not careful. Next, let's move on to looking at where you're going to spend the meat of your time when you're studying a matchup, and that's to do with relative attack and throw speeds. So here I've put together a simple table of attacks, and I'll show you a comparative table for throws later on. So all I've done is I've looked through both of these characters' guides on fantasystrike.com, and I've looked at their attacks and I've organized them by speed. So the lower the speed of a character's attack, the faster that attack is, and the more powerful it is, because a faster attack will beat a slower attack. So if we take these two first attacks as an example, a Grave's Q is 0.0 speed, and it will beat Degree's K at 0.2 speed. So attack versus attack is resolved by speed difference. So it's very important. The other side of that equation is, of course, how much damage you can deal off of an attack. So as you can see, just at a quick glance, the fastest attacks in the matchup, and this is true of most matchups and characters, the fastest attacks have no combo potential off of them. They're enders or can't combo, and therefore you get what it says on the tin. You play it and it deals this much damage, and that's it. By contrast, once we start getting up into the normal range speeds, so around 2.6 and up, you can see that almost every one of those moves combos. And with some exception, you'll see that the maximum damage off of these moves is much higher than the maximum damage off of the moves that are very, very fast. So what does a chart like this actually tell us? It tells us how risky high damage, high payoff moves entail. So if I look at Dugray's most punishing combo, for instance, I see that it starts off of a 7, which is his Q. QAA is the maximum damage he can deal with this move, and it deals 34 plus damage. I'll explain that in a second. But this plus essentially takes into consideration his innate. So every time he hits with a face card or with aces, then he will deal damage for each of those cards equivalent to the difference between his hand size and his opponent's hand size, if his opponent's hand size is larger. So we can see this 34 damage combo starts at 7.0 speed. So not only can Grave block it and take relatively little damage, but he can also beat it with every single one of the attack options that's faster than it. He can beat it with his own maximum damage combo, which is keyed off of his 6 into triple ace for 51 damage. He can beat it with 5 into the same. He can beat it with any of these moves that's faster than 7.0 speed. It also gives us a sense of how good each of these characters' reversals are. We call it a reversal because it allows you to turn around a disadvantaged situation, usually knockdown, where your opponent is trying to cross you up with a normal move that's usually 2 speed or 3 speed, and your reversal is flat out better than both of those options. So Grave's reversal, one of the best in the game, his Q, is 0.0 speed and deals 10 damage. On the other hand, Dugray also has a reversal on his King, which is 0.2 speed, and it deals 10 damage plus his innate. So in this instance, we can give a slight advantage to Grave's reversal. There could be, for instance, a situation where Grave has knocked Dugray down, Dugray plays his K reversal to get out of that awkward situation, and for his trouble takes 10 damage to the face. How crucial is that? Well, not hugely crucial. Dugray has 90 hit points, Grave's Q can only deal 10 damage, so he's not too worried about eating that damage. In the very late game, once Dugray is at 10 life or less, it will become incredibly crucial, as any Qs that Grave has are going to flat out beat every single attack option that Dugray has access to. So we can give Grave a little bit of a point in terms of reversal speed. What's much more important for Dugray about this 0.2 speed K is how it interacts with Grave's next fastest attack, which is his triple ace super, True Power of Storms, which is 0.4 speed and deals a whopping 45 damage. So now Dugray, who might have been, slightly miffed that he loses out to Grave's Q, is incredibly happy for this K, because it is his only attack option that flat out stuffs and beats Grave's triple ace super. So from Grave's point of view, he has to think just a little bit harder about whether he wants to play his triple ace raw, as in not off of a dodge and not comboing into it off of a normal attack, which both of those options are available to him. Some characters who don't have a move faster than 0.4 speed really have to be careful about playing around Grave's triple ace with blocks and dodges, Every time they push a throw button or an attack button, they are risking eating 45 damage to the face, which is not nothing. The next speeds that are important to look at are DeGray's own double ace move. So DeGray on his ace has a dodge, and he also has this double ace side. It's 1.2 speed, and it deals 20 damage plus whatever he gets off of his innate. And how risky is it in this matchup? Well, it's beaten by 3 of Graves' cards. His Q, his triple ace super, and his single ace move. So anytime that DeGray is thinking about leading this double ace move raw, he has to think about circumstances where Grave has these options in hand. Especially important considering that Grave can get his Qs back if he successfully mind games people with his innate ability. 2 of the options that Grave has access to that beat this double ace move are single cards. So he can beat this expensive, powerful move with his Q and a single ace. Once we get above 1.2 speed, things open up a little bit. It trades back and forth. We have some single moves that deal okay damage but have a good ability on them for Grave. We have some strong combos that Grave has access to off of his K. Then it moves back to DeGray, who has okay damage off of his J, and can lead into a very strong combo off of his 2. And then we move up to 2s and all the way up. It's important to note that both of these characters have normal moves that are at 0.6 speed. So their 2s will be 2.6, their 3s are 3.6. So there are circumstances where 2 attacks may be played that have the same speed, and when that happens, they clash off of each other. Both of them deal damage, but neither character can combo off of that combat reveal. So having looked at this chart, we can have a bit of a sense of where different danger zones are. Grave has the speed advantage. He also makes DeGray's AA move riskier than it would be in other matchups because of that very strong triple ace move that can undercut it. And then generally the speeds trade off back and forth, with DeGray ending up having the slowest possible attack in the matchup at 7 speed for devastating amounts of damage. To give you a sense of just how brutal this attack can be, imagine for a second that Grave is hovering around 10 cards, and DeGray has 4 cards in hand. His ace dodge, a queen, and 2 other aces. Grave attacks, and DeGray plays his ace dodge, which not only comes back to his hand, but allows him to play a full combo, so as if he had played an attack and can now use up all of his combo points rather than playing a single move. So he dodges with the ace, plays the queen as a starter, finishes it off with ace-ace. So how much damage is that? The queen does 14, plus the difference between their hands. So Grave has, we said, 10 cards in hand. Then his ace-ace super deals 20, plus the difference between the cards in their hand. So with 4 cards in hand, he's dealt 54 damage. Not bad. So this 34 can be deceptive. He's never going to get, unless Grave and DeGray are playing incredibly crazy games, the odds that you're going to land that are very, very slim. However, it is something that Grave has to constantly be thinking about. Anytime he reduces the damage output of QAA, he's also reducing the size of his hand and limiting his own damage potential. Let's have a look at maximum damage and see if there's anything interesting going on. So at the very fast end, we've already talked about the fact that Grave's triple ace is absolutely money. 45 damage absolutely blows everything else around the 1.0 speed and faster range just out of the water. Once we go higher in the attack speed, so once we get to the slower attacks, we can see that Grave still dominates in the max damage category. But if you look a little closer, you'll note that all of his max damage combos are a normal move into triple ace. So Grave has two options. He can either spend time waiting into the late game and accumulating aces naturally, either through straights that he might be able to land, or by simply drawing the aces off of out of his deck. Or he has to discard cards, pairs, 3 of kinds, 4 of a kinds, in order to put those aces directly in his hand. So generally, Grave is going to ramp up slowly in power unless he announces to his opponent that he is putting some of those aces in his hand. On the other hand, if we look at the gray, most of his max damage combos also have ace-ace in them. So he's got one less ace to look for. So that's important. Even a single fewer aces to have in your hand to unlock that damage is going to give that damage potential to you much earlier in the game. So we can say that even though De Grey has a potentially lower top end in terms of maximum damage output that he can do, he gets access to it much earlier in the matchup. If we move over into the merely good damage category, which is, acceptable combos that you could get that don't involve supers, basically, we can see that these characters output are fairly close in terms of damage output. So at 2.6 speed, they're both dealing about 17 damage off of their 2s. Once we get up to their 5s, they're both dealing about 25 damage. And up to their into the 6 and 7 range, they're both dealing near 30 damage. So in each of these cases, I'd probably give the edge to De Grey. He's probably getting some additional damage off of his innate. So in these cases where his damage output is lower, they're probably tied. And in these cases where they're tied or basically the same, I'd probably give the edge to De Grey. However, if we look at Grave's K, we can see that it bucks that trend. So off of 2.2 speed, he can deal a much higher amount of damage than even his 5.6 average combo. So a very efficient, very strong combo for him is K plus into ace for 26 damage. And that's both very fast and deals comparatively great damage to the next higher damage combos that De Grey can do. So speaking generally, we can say that Grave has the speed advantage in terms of attacks. He has damage output advantage in the late game. And he has this critical, very efficient, very strong combo with his Ks. That crucially only loses to 2 attacks that De Grey can play. Either he has to risk his double ace super, or he has to play a K of his own to beat that K starting combo from Grave. So that's good information to know in general. So De Grey is a little bit more plotting, and Grave is a little bit more spry. However, keep in mind that De Grey has that special ace dodge. And that means that a lot of this speed advantage just doesn't matter. So whenever both of these characters are standing, Grave has to think about, can I play this attack knowing that my opponent generally is going to lose to my attack moves and is probably going to prefer to play something that beats them outright? Especially considering that De Grey keeps his ace dodge when it doesn't get thrown, and it allows him to full combo off of it rather than playing just a single move. Let's move on to throws. So you'll note this chart is much smaller than the attack chart. These characters don't have any special throws. They don't have throws off of their Jack, Queen, King, or Ace ranks. So they just have normal throws. And normal throws follow this typical format. They have the speed of whatever rank of card they're on. So if it's a 7 throw, it starts with a 7. And the decimal is determined by the character's innate throw speed. So we can see that Grave has faster throws than De Grey. His throws end in 0.6, and De Grey's end in 0.8. Damage off of throws is likewise going to be the same no matter what throw it is. So where normal attacks scale up based on their rank, throws always deal the same amount of damage. In Grave's case, all of his throws deal 7, and in De Grey's case, all of his throws deal 8. So not a huge damage differential there. If we look at their good damage, both of them are pretty close, with, again, De Grey, as we've established, having a slight damage advantage off of successful good combo. And the difference only gets more pronounced if we go into their max damage combo. So as you can see, Grave cannot play his triple ace super off of a throw, whereas De Grey can absolutely play his double ace super. So that's a crucial thing to keep in mind in any matchup against Grave, that once you know or suspect that he has access to his AAA super, blocking is absolutely guaranteed safe from taking that damage. You may get thrown to death because you're so scared and continually blocking, but you are safe holding back. Contrast that to De Grey. He can deal 20 plus damage because of his innate off of AA, off of an attack, off of a throw, and off of a dodge. So no matter what you do, no matter what combat card you reveal, you are always at risk of taking that damage. I've added a little asterisk here, and we'll get into that a little bit, but it has to do with the fact that his 7 has an attack side and a throw side, and if he chooses to discard a card, after he's combat revealed it, he can flip the card around. So what does that mean, and why have I added it to this speed chart? Well, consider this example. Grave is throwing with his 7th throw, and De Grey is throwing with his 7th throw. Grave wins. However, De Grey can immediately discard a card, flip his 7 around into an attack, and crush De Grey's 7th throw. So even though on paper, Grave has the faster throw, he's still going to lose ties if that's played. Combine that with the fact that Grave has a very strong ability on his 7, and that makes it even less likely that he's going to want to risk throwing with a 7, because his next fastest throw, his 8, is going to lose just as badly to De Grey's 7th throw, but it is going to beat his 8th throw. So that's a very strong push for Grave not to throw with his 7. And if we go back to the stats that we covered at the beginning of this video, that means that his rank of throws is much lower. Okay, what does that mean? What implications does that have? Once again, we get to how good De Grey's ace is. As I repeated before, he only loses it when you throw him. So against Grave, who already has throws with abilities on them that he doesn't want to play, and is now strictly dominated on one rank of throws, it only really gives him his 8, 9, and 10 throw that he's willing to play very often. And that means that De Grey's ace dodge is that much safer and less likely to be punished. Finally, we want to have a look at the other abilities that both of these characters have on their cards, and see if there's any interactions there. Let's start with Graves J. So it's a 2.4 speed attack, which is pretty good if we consult back to our chart. It beats a fair amount of the slower stuff that de Grey is going to be playing. But it's keyed off of dealing block damage. So remember, just like a block, de Grey's ace comes back to his hand. So in general, we can say that de Grey is probably going to be blocking a little bit less than other characters we'd encounter, so this makes this J a little bit less powerful. I'm going to skip talking about his 10 ability for now and move on to his 7. So Martial Mastery allows him to draw 2 cards, discard a card from his hand, and then look at his opponent's hand. This is very strong, so remember, a lot of the damage potential that de Grey has sits in his queen, and it sits in his double ace. So this ability lets us look and see how many of those options are actually sitting in de Grey's hand right now. This can be crucial in the late game, or if de Grey gets into a situation where he goes very low in terms of his cards in hand, in order to get huge payoff off of his innate. So Martial Mastery might give us a really good insight into when we're in danger and in how much danger we actually are. Finally, Mental Toughness allows him to counter an ability so long as it's not an ace, a joker, or a character card ability. So Grave can't use this 10 to prevent the additional damage off of de Grey's moral high ground. He can't counter de Grey's ace coming back to his hand, or its ability to allow de Grey to full combo off of a successful dodge with his ace. And it can't counter de Grey playing his joker as a face down card in order to prevent combo damage. So what can it counter? Let's have a look and see what de Grey's abilities are. He has an ability on his 4 called Troublesome Rhetoric. So after everybody's drawn their cards at the beginning of the turn, he can play this card from his hand, declare either attack, block, throw, or dodge, and if the opponent combat reveals that option, he gains 12 life. So this might be a good target to counter, especially when it's in a situation where Grave is threatening lethal off of perhaps a throw or attack mix-up. Either of those options would kill de Grey this turn. If de Grey plays this ability and essentially locks out one of those options, say by declaring attack, we now would give him 12 life, and that would take him out of lethal range if we showed an attack. And if the de Grey player has done his homework and knows that, then he can safely play as if you're not going to play attack, because even if you do, he's going to survive it. So in that situation, it might be a very good idea to counter this ability. Next, we have that ability on his 7, where he can rotate it after he's played his combat option. So this is much more clear-cut. Again, it's not, oh my god, 100% of the time we need to counter this. This move is beaten by any attack, so obviously when we play an attack, we're not going to care if this move is on the table, because it's 7.6 speed and 7.8 speed in terms of a throw. So long as we play any card in our deck, we're going to outspeed it so long as it's an attack, and we'll be fine. Circumstances where you want to counter this, if he has lethal off of this combat reveal. So remember, work out the damage off of this 7 move, either as a throw or as an attack. See what the maximum damage is on that chart that we looked at earlier, or the one that you've built on your own, which is what I recommend you do. And then you'll know what range this move is lethal on. And that's it. Those are the only abilities that de Grey has that we can counter. His only other ability is on his ace, and we already covered that, so I'm not going to show you that. The fact that it comes back to his hand so long as it's not thrown, and it allows him to full combo off of a dodge if he uses it to dodge. So this has been a primer of how to think about the different interactions between two particular characters. Obviously, there's a lot more to this matchup in terms of the particulars and sort of who has advantage in which circumstances, whether it's better for De Grey to play to a low hand in order to threaten additional damage off of his innate ability, different circumstances that could come up when using troublesome rhetoric or countering point counterpoint or troublesome rhetoric is particularly good for you or particularly bad. But that's for you to discover. This is just a primer to get you thinking about what kinds of questions you should be asking yourself, what kind of tools you can build for yourself to start studying a matchup and thinking about the way that different things interact with each other. If you want to take it one step further, you want to start building an in-depth knowledge and understanding of a particular matchup, you have to do two things. One, you want to read the advanced guides for both your character and the character you're playing against, so that that'll give you a sense of what the nuances of both those characters are and where you might see some additional interaction and complexity. And step two is just to play the matchup a lot. Nothing beats real-world experience. Every character in this cast, even though they have a particularly strong game plan in one particular direction, has a backup plan, has an alternate way that they can be played. A very block-heavy De Grey, for instance, as opposed to a almost no-block De Grey who just gets his damage and beats attacks using his ace dodge. And other different circumstances. So there's just nothing that beats real-world experience against a variety of different opponents of high skill level. So get in QM, find somebody in ranked mode, go to the forums and ask for somebody to spar with you if you're looking for practice. Just make a post in the Yomi subforum asking for, hey, I'd like to look for some help. And I'll put the link, of course, to the fantasystrike.com forums, and particularly to the Yomi subforum, so you'll know where to go. Things are particularly exciting and active right now. The forums are jumping because Yomi has just been released on Steam. So if you're a fan of Steam, you haven't picked up the game yet, and you've liked this video, now would be an amazing time to join. I believe there's been an average of about 10 to 12 games going on at any given time right now. So the place is really, really jumping. So now is an excellent time to jump into the game with a whole bunch of other players that are just starting out. As ever, I am Mystic Juicer. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy yourself some Yomi.